You're listening to the SSPX podcast, and welcome to episode 22 of the Crisis in the Church series. With this episode, we're starting our study of the period after the Second Vatican Council. Over the next 20 or so episodes, we'll be diving into topics like the Novus Ordo Mass, religious liberty, collegiality, the Hermeneutic of Continuity, Feenyism, obedience and its limits, Sedevacantism, Ecumenism, Infallibility, the new Canonizations, supplied jurisdiction, and much more. But today, we'll start with the reforms that started to take place just after the Second Vatican Council. Father John-Mark McFarland will take us through the immediate aftermath of the Council and show us how the Council and the spirit of Vatican II meant an immediate overhaul and a deformation of everything in the Church. If you'd like to learn more about this series we're doing on the Crisis in the Church, or go back and revisit our previous 21 episodes, or if you want to support this project, please visit sspxpodcast.com/crisis. Now, we'll turn to our conversation with Father McFarland. Well, welcome back to the SSPX podcast and our next episode of the Crisis in the Church series, welcoming Father McFarland from Our Lady of Sorrows in Phoenix. Hello, Father. How are you today?
Doing well, Andrew.
Good. Very good. And we are talking today about post-conciliar reforms, things that happened after the council. You and I were talking just a second ago before we started this, and I asked you, is it true, is it fair to say that the majority of the things that we Catholics see as problematic elements in the post-conciliar church, these didn't really happen during the council. They might have happened because of the council, but most of the innovations and changes and bad stuff, in a colloquial term, that we see in the church today, that happened after the council, really. Is that correct?
Definitely. So okay. The council is the impetus, is the beginning, but it's taken from there and advanced to a great degree. And certainly not everything that we see, in fact, a relatively small percentage, I would say, perhaps surprisingly small percentage of the supposed reforms in the church are even mentioned explicitly in the council. Okay. So a lot of the reformations, a lot of the changes that happened are done under the guise or under the idea of the spirit of Vatican II. And this is something unique. We don't see the spirit of the Council of Trent. We don't see the spirit of the Council of Florence, but we do hear a lot about the spirit of Vatican II. So I guess we can start there. Right. And we certainly on our side, on the traditionalist side, we talk about things being justified, novelties being justified by this spirit of Vatican II, which we would say undoubtedly goes beyond the literal wording of the documents. And the reason we say that is because the modernists say precisely the same thing. They'll, in talking about a particular reform, they'll say, well, this might not be in Vatican II itself, but it's clearly in the spirit of Vatican II. Along the same lines, this is what the council wanted, even if it didn't say that directly.
So this is almost a justification that modernists, they're going to say, well, this wasn't really in the council documents, but in order to really fulfill the spirit, fulfill what happened there, we have to just keep going down this path. Right.
Well, I mean, to look at the documents too, what there is an underlying spirit that's there, and it comes from this. We're not defining things. We're not making dogmas clear. We have this idea of being pastoral, of somehow reaching out, opening to the world, and that's what's going to drive this spirit. For example, just the idea of newness. The word novus, or some variation, novus, appears 212 times in the Vatican II documents themselves. Right, the word means new. That's way more than any other council. Paul VI said that the word newness has been given to us as an order, a program. So we see even just in that choice of wording that there's this drive towards something new that you can say is really the spirit of the council, even if it's not explicitly spelling out all of these particular new reforms.
I've asked one or two of our other priests a derivation of this same question, and that is why? Why did the Council Fathers want these changes, these things to happen? So I'll ask it to you in this context, Father. What what were they trying to do with making everything new? Did they just not like old stuff, tradition?
I think it depends on the individual council father. Probably a lot of them were certainly just sort of along for the ride, in the sense that they weren't pushing this, but it seemed that this is what the Pope wanted, and so they went along with it. But plenty of them had this real desire to make a new church that was more focused on humanity, that was more in step with the philosophy and the general thinking of the modern world. They, for various reasons, what those are, I would take a lot of research to try to
sure
to figure out exactly what was behind in each person's mind. But it's but there is that desire certainly to be more in step with the modern world, to stop fighting effectively.
And the idea there is really to bring about a union, or an ecumenism, we would say a false ecumenism with other religions, with other peoples.
Right. So a kind of understanding, a kind of peace with everybody that's not founded in the truth, that's not founded in the peace brought by our Lord Jesus Christ, which is given in his church, but a new super church that ultimately encompasses and brings in absolutely everybody, without them having to do anything at all.
Right. When you say super church, I kind of started giggling, because I'm thinking it sounds like a Walmart super center, but modern churches are kind of like that. They're just kind of big and open, and there's greeters and
right.
Anyway. All right. So this is the spirit of Vatican II, and this is something that kind of introduces us to what all the rest of the post-conciliar reformers are going to be doing. They're going to be taking these ideas that were present in Vatican II, and then they're going to be building on them. Where's the next step that we go? The next thing that's going to start really making some changes? Is it modernism, or?
Well, undoubtedly. So modernism having its influence in the council through especially those experts, the periti, as we call them, the professional theologians who were assisting particular bishops, and some of them have had tremendous influence. Famous names: Bach, Congar, Rahner, Kung, who just died a couple of days ago. God rest his soul. And these men were drawing on modernist influences by their own admission, and they were the most influential men at the council. Karl Rahner, perhaps the most influential of all.
So there's this connection between the neo-modernism that we studied, 4 or 5 episodes ago, and the characters you just mentioned, and then the reforms that are going to be following afterwards. There's a historical connection, but there's also kind of a spiritual and ideological connection between them too. Right.
And undoubtedly this idea of newness, this man-centeredness is being driven by neo-modernism. You can say neo-modernism is this mysterious spirit of the council.
Mm-hmm.
And that we have that evident divergence in the council itself from the traditional way of thinking, and those original schemas that had been prepared prior to the council, and then what we actually ended up with the new schemas and the new documents that were prepared by the neo-modernists. So it's something different. And then after the council, right, we see the continued influence of these men. The official commentary of the council texts cites Rahner 95 times, Congar 67 times, de Lubac 15 times, and St. Thomas comes in at 48 times. So that's Karl Rahner cited almost twice as often as the greatest theologian in the history of the Catholic Church. Something seems a little off there.
Well, I guess if you were an optimist, you'd say we're glad that he was mentioned at all, but wow. So these neo-modernists, we saw how they had great influence in the council itself. They're going to have even more or equal influence in the period after the council in making some of these reforms happen.
Right. 1966, Paul VI creates 5 commissions for the interpretation of the council texts. Right? We need commissions to interpret the council texts. Seems like there's probably some things that are unclear, and most of the members of these commissions are former periti at the council. So some of the names that we've just mentioned. So Rahner and de Lubac, both named to the International Theological Commission. De Lubac on Balthasar, as well as Father Ratzinger, who was certainly a neo-modernist theologian, all named cardinals by John Paul II. Right, so Cardinal Ratzinger, before becoming Pope, was one of the most influential men in the Curia, serving as the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the International Theological Commission, and the Pontifical Biblical Commission. So and you have the post-conciliar popes expressing their admiration rather frequently for some of these modernist and neo-modernist thinkers.
Right. It was interesting. You mentioned Kung passing away just a couple of days ago. We're recording this here at the beginning of April, and it was very interesting that he was condemned or censured, I believe, in 1979. I was just reading some articles about him, and on the day he died, the Pontifical Academy for Life, on their Twitter account, they basically eulogized him, saying, well, he was a great thinker, and he made people think, made people kind of reflect on things. He was censured, and here we have an official arm of the Vatican basically praising him. So these theologians, even they were condemned, maybe not in name by Pius XII, but they were condemned by Pius XII. They were condemned even afterwards, and they're still very active, and they're still in high positions.
Right, and Hans Kung's censure was pretty mild too. So he was prohibited from teaching in seminaries or universities, but that was about it. He was still entirely a priest in good standing, was able to preach, administer the sacraments, and so on. Shortly after Benedict XVI was elected, they had a long lunch together in the Vatican. Maybe talking about old times or something, but clearly he was not persona non grata.
Right.
He was still very much praised and thought well of in many circles of the church.
So this is the spirit. These are the people who are involved. Let's get into some of the changes that happened, some of the more concrete changes, some of the examples that happened, and we'll take a look at some of the church administration and policy that shifted after this time. Right.
So again, you have this idea of newness, and Paul VI himself, and it's important to note that too. So these experts, these theologians are driving the train from a doctrinal, from an ideological point of view. Nevertheless, the Pope and the bishops are complicit. They're giving these men the power that they have. These are the same bishops after the council that were at the council and active at the council, who were then putting these new reforms in place in their dioceses, and especially Paul VI himself introducing these changes in the universal church and in Rome itself. So you have an overhaul in the first place of the Curia, of the those offices of the Vatican that are there to assist the Pope. You had the Holy Office was that particular part of the Curia that was charged with doctrine, and it had been established in the 16th century for combating heresies and trying to suppress dangers to the faith. So in 1965, it was changed. It was renamed the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and the Index of Forbidden Books, over which it presided, was simply eliminated. So there'd be no more obligations in law to avoid reading certain works, whether heretical or immoral or whatever, and that had been a tool of the Holy Office was now suddenly gone. Also, the Holy Office, when it was investigating particular writers or suspicion of heresy, they would conduct their investigations in secret so that their political pressure would not be brought to bear to prevent condemnations. That practice was also eliminated in that change in 1965, so that now it would be known who was being investigated, and that then, say, for example, if it's a Jesuit, the Jesuit superiors, or if it's a priest in a particular diocese, his bishop could then do what they could to prevent a condemnation of that priest under their charge. And the Holy Office had been the highest, the office in the Curia. So all the others were subordinate to it, and it was removed from that position and replaced with the Secretariat of State, which is quite telling. The Secretariat of State involved with internal affairs of the Church and external affairs of the Church, but it's really the diplomatic arm of the Curia. So you have diplomacy takes the place of doctrine. It's sort of summarizes the whole spirit of Vatican II pretty well, if you ask me.
Both in a real sense and also in a symbolic sense, it's saying doctrine is not the most important thing in the Church anymore. Diplomatic things are the most important thing. So the office that Cardinal Ottaviani was heading up, and that he was fighting to keep tradition alive and keeping doctrine pure, not really that important anymore.
Right. Moving into secondary importance.
Wow. In terms of council teachings, so Dignitatis Humanae is talking about how there should be more of a ability for people to choose their own religion and live in peace, etc. But the Vatican, after the Second Vatican Council, is going to take what Dignitatis Humanae said, and then it's going to really put it into practice. Is that a fair way of saying that?
Yes, and more clearly than Dignitatis Humanae expresses it.
Okay.
So it's fairly vague and qualified in Dignitatis Humanae, but after the council, the Vatican is urging the secularization of Catholic states. That is, no longer recognizing the Church, the Catholic Church, as the one official religion of their particular state, as it was in Spain or in Italy, the South American nations, a few of them. You had the Concordat, the agreement with the government of Italy that had been made in 1929, was entirely renegotiated. Those negotiations finished in 1984, in which that principle that the Catholic Church is the one official religion of the Italian state is no longer held to be in force. So it's set aside, and with disastrous results. We have, Italy now. You have divorce, and you have one of the lowest birth rates in the world, and and there are other factors playing into that, certainly, but definitely this removal of the place of the Church in the life of Italian civil society is going to contribute to that.
When you hear about this and you hear this just kind of breaking apart of the kingship of Christ, you can now see more clearly why Archbishop Lefebvre wrote "They have uncrowned him." Right.
And so you're effectively making the statement that our Lord doesn't have a particular place in civil life, except insofar as he influences individuals.
Right.
Which is simply false. If men individually have to follow Christ, then men collectively have to follow Christ. And so this certainly undermines that reality. If it doesn't outright deny it, but it looks an awful lot like a denial.
Right.
And it's one thing to say that, in many places at the moment, it's not practicable, that the states resisted and so on. It's quite another thing to simply acquiesce to that as if it were some kind of ideal, that we're all freer and more mature now. Modern man is understanding himself and his world better, which is just nonsense. And we see it in the absolute doctrinal relativism in the modern world, and we see it in the moral relativism as well. I mean, the absurdities of homosexual marriage, or all this transgender nonsense, or the promotion of abortion and contraception, these things that are destroying human society around us. They come from this mentality. Not saying it started at this moment, but it's this mentality in the world at large, and here invading the church, that have led us to these disasters on the moral and social levels.
Right. It's the conflict between the two words, the religious toleration versus religious liberty. Those two don't mean the same thing.
And this is impossible. This acceptance is impossible without Dignitatis Humanae. Mm-hmm. Right? It's all justified by appeal to the council. This is what the council wants. Right. So you can torture up orthodox explanations for what it says in Dignitatis Humanae. Well, maybe if it means this, the sort of it's accidentally infallible thesis, which is an impossibility, but that's a discussion for another time. To say that, well, there can be an orthodox interpretation of it. How does Paul VI interpret it? Right, the Pope who signed it and pushed it through. How does he interpret it? He interprets it as states should no longer be Catholic, and we do not have Catholic states left in the modern world.
What about the religious orders? Do they stay intact at all during this time? A little bit of a leading question there.
A little bit. Anybody with any experience of religious orders in the modern church, knows what's going on there. And in the introductory, the very first podcast we did, where we talked about the crisis in the church, we talked about some of that falling apart of religious life. So after the council, every religious order was required to hold a special general chapter to update their constitutions to bring them in line with Vatican II, the Vatican II decree Perfecti Caritatis, dealing with the religious orders. So, even the Carthusians, of whom it was said that never reformed because never deformed, they asked for an exemption from the special chapter. They said, there's nothing wrong with our constitutions. We don't have any problems. We'd like to keep it. That permission was refused. And they had to make changes, liturgical changes, some disciplinary changes. And we see there's a defining of religious life in reference to man rather than to God, to the service of human beings rather than the glory given to God by the consecration of a soul, especially to him by the vows of religion. Right. And we know, of course, I think most of us have that firsthand experience with some of those changes, the elimination of religious habits, or the very occasional wearing of religious habits. We break them out for special occasions, dust them off and put them on. But in general, we're walking around in, cargo shorts and Hawaiian T-shirts or whatever, or right. nuns in pantsuits and the like, right? And living outside community as well. So we will eliminate everything that makes a distinction between the religious and the secular. So I was talking to someone one time who was telling me about a relative of hers, and who was a religious, and said, and she belongs to this great order where she doesn't have to live in community. She has her own apartment. She doesn't have to wear a habit. She can dress how she wants. And what's the point?
Right.
Why if your life is going to be exactly the same as everybody else's, why would you become a religious? Yeah. And that's what the entire world has been asking, and nobody's becoming religious. I mean, orders are dying out all around the world because nobody wants to do that. Right? Even the notion of obedience is undermined. It becomes a dialogue, right? Dialogue between the superior and the inferior to determine God's will, which is, again, you see that spirit of the council, which I think used the word dialogue 28 times. This word that never been used before in the history of magisterial documents. So it's this is right in line again with this spirit of Vatican II, right? Appealing to the council. It's about dialogue. It's about man, and so we overhaul religious life along those lines as well.
But you're just so much more approachable when you wear cargo shorts, Father. Come on. Sorry. So, all right. So those are just a few of the changes in church administration and church policy. For the last section of things I wanted to chat with you about today, Father, how they get this modernism, how they get the council into the lives of the faithful, because those things are, how the church is organized and structured and those types of things. Now let's talk about how do we, the faithful, get touched by Vatican II? There's obviously going to be the new Mass. That's not something that we're going to get into today. We're going to do several episodes on that, more than several. But how else are the post-conciliar reforms going to be touching the lives of the faithful?
Well, obviously, the new Mass, that's everybody's sort of weekly contact with the church, if we can express it that way. So that's going to be the biggest thing by far, and rightly deserves its own treatment. The teaching of catechism is another way, so that you have the production of these catechisms that are, again, in line with and justified by the spirit of Vatican II, where it's not going to be dogmatic. It's going to be, man-centered. It's going to be more leaning towards the ideas of religious experiences rather than objective facts. So the very worst one is the infamous Dutch Catechism, which denies any number of dogmas, right? The incarnation, the real presence, the ministerial priesthood, the existence of angels. And here, this to give you an idea of how things work in the modern church. So the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the former Holy Office, condemns the Dutch Catechism. But on go the political machinations and so on. And the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith allows the Dutch Catechism to be printed, provided that the condemnation is included in the Catechism as an appendix.
Because that'll help.
I guess.
Okay.
So it has outright heresy, and it's allowed to. You can still find it now. In Catholic bookstores. The more orthodox ones won't carry it, but it's still out there. It still exists.
So just for a step back on this, Father, I have a question when you say the Dutch Catechism, is this the catechism for the Dutch speaking world, or is it in the, so this is the translation
produced by the catechism that was produced by the Episcopal Conference for the Netherlands. Okay. So that, another thing we could have touched on is the rise of Episcopal conferences as having real power and so on, and their battles with even the relatively mildly exercised authority of the Curia in the last 50 years. But so at the beginning you had individual, shortly after Vatican II, you had individual Episcopal conferences producing their own catechisms. The Dutch Catechism, far and away the worst.
So this would be like the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops producing a catechism for all of the dioceses in the United States to use. This is something like that.
Same idea. Yeah.
All right.
And then the French bishops had one produced as well, which was called Living Stones. Also had plenty of heresies in it. Cardinal Ratzinger, then the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, denounced it, and then withdrew his comments after the French bishops jumped to its defense. Diplomacy over dogma.
Wow. It seems like they want to still do what's right, but then as soon as they face any kind of pushback whatsoever, it's, no, well, then it's okay. We'll go ahead and let you publish it with an appendix. No, we'll let the French bishops go ahead and publish this one, even with heresies. It's
we can come to a sort of compromise, which basically involves us getting entirely run over and trying to have some little face-saving measure attached to it, maybe.
Wow. Okay.
Right, that's you can't negotiate. You can't act diplomatically with the revolution. It doesn't work. They just want to cut your head off. So, and then you do have the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So this is the official one produced at Rome. It does reveal a certain conservatizing evolution, we might say. So produced under John Paul II with the influence of then Cardinal Ratzinger, Benedict XVI. But again, it is meant to be an expression of the spirit of Vatican II. So John Paul II, together with liturgical reform and the new code of canon law, the new catechism gives a solid foundation to the ecclesiastical reform started by the council. So, and the catechism in large part is a stringing together of Vatican II quotations. And there's plenty of things in there that are absolutely orthodox. It doesn't have any of the really shockingly heretical things that are in the Dutch or the French catechisms. Okay. But there are certainly problematic passages. For example, the Old Testament is an indispensable part of sacred scripture. Its books are divinely inspired and preserve permanent value. That's fine. But because the Old Covenant has never been revoked. Okay. It's misleading, certainly, to imply that the Old Covenant is still in force, which it's not. It has been superseded by the coming of Jesus Christ, and that is the constant teaching of the church throughout 2,000 years. So, or the divisions between Christians hold the church back from realizing the plenitude of Catholicity, which is proper to it in those of her children who, it is certain, belong to it by baptism, but who find themselves separated from full communion. Right? That comes straight from Unitatis Redintegratio, the Vatican II document on ecumenism, but it quotes it verbatim. And the failure of those calling themselves Christians to enter into the Catholic Church, or they're breaking away from the Catholic Church, does not deprive the Church of her Catholicity. That's false. Right. And you have the introduction of this notion of full and partial communion, which is not a traditional notion, which is introduced at Vatican II and was never before seen in the history of the Church.
But why not? Why not put it in now? That's fine.
Right. Well, it goes along with this in the whole ecumenical thrust of the council and the spirit of the council.
Right. Wow. Well, it's fascinating. This has just been a quick look at some of the changes that happened after Vatican II, and we can see it's just going to continue to snowball. These are some of the early changes that happened directly after the council, and it really is striking because there's not, when you take a step back and look at it. I was born in 82. I was born after a lot of this stuff happened, but when you take a step and look back, there's nothing in the church that hasn't been touched by this spirit of Vatican II, or by this is a complete revamp of the Catholic Church in its hierarchy, in its governance, in its way of doing things, in the catechism, in the everything.
Right, and it reaches down and touches everything. As talking about the, getting into the liturgical form later, but churches are different. They look different. Mm-hmm. You go inside a church that was built 100 years ago versus a church that was built 30 years ago. They're strikingly different. Vestments are different. The music is different. The daily life of Catholics, the practice of devotions, the books they read, it's all different. It all had to be changed. And all of that is justified in the name of the spirit of the council.
Yeah. Well, it was worth it. Not really. Sorry.
It's really made things an awful lot better, hasn't it?
Right. It has. I mean, again, going back to our very first episode, there's a disaster in the church, and I think I mentioned this during our first conversation. You would think that they would take a step and look and say, maybe we should go back. Maybe we should try to fix things.
And part of the problem is this obsessive notion of trying to salvage the council. There is a hermeneutic of continuity that, if you have a hermeneutic, it means that something needs to be interpreted.
Right.
And if your authoritative council needs a system of interpretation, then it's not very authoritative.
Right.
There's something fundamentally wrong with it. But to try to salvage it and say, no, the problem wasn't the council, it was how people applied the council. But it's the same ideas that are influencing those things that are different and new in the council and those reforms afterwards. And it's the same people doing both.
Right.
It's the same theologians, it's the same bishops, it's the same pope. Paul VI is pope for another 13 years after the close of the council. Right? And John Paul II was a bishop at the council. Benedict XVI was the theologian at the council. Right? It's the same people implementing these reforms. So to say that it was somehow hijacked, who did the hijacking? From whom did they hijack? Right? There's continuity there. Right? It does get worse. There are people who want to put the brakes on to some extent, and there are those who want to go full steam ahead. But fundamentally, it's being driven by the same ideas and the same people.
On a micro level, it's very similar to the people who say, well, when Pope Francis says something that's weird or troublesome or makes people say, well, he's a heretic or something, they'll say, oh, well, you're just interpreting him badly. Well, but then he shouldn't have said something that could have been misinterpreted. Like the problem is not with my interpretation. The problem is with the statement.
And if it's causing a worldwide scandal, he should probably clarify what he means, which he doesn't do.
Right. So in the same way, well, we're just interpreting the council bad. People are just interpreting the council badly. The council's fine. No, the problem is with the council.
Right. Right. There are fundamentally flaws. If it's fundamental flaws, if it's so easy to interpret it so incorrectly.
Right. Well, Father, this has been fascinating. Thank you for taking us through these post-conciliar changes. Like I said, we're going to go through a lot more of the liturgy that was. It's a great way that you said it. This is the way that it's going to touch people's lives every week. Sadly, a lot less than once a week nowadays, but be that as it may. So we're going to take a lot of time and go through that, and we'll look forward to having you on for another episode here later on.
I look forward to it too, Andrew. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for listening to and watching episode 22 of our Crisis in the Church series here on the SSPX podcast. In episode 23, we'll continue with the theme of the Post-Conciliar reforms and have our first of 4 episodes on the Novus Ordo Mass. Father Reuter will join us to discuss how the new Mass was constructed in order to appeal to non-Catholics. Truly, it was an ecumenical Mass. If you have a question on the topic of the crisis, please feel free to ask it at sspxpodcast.com/crisis. Please share this episode with someone who you might think would enjoy it. And if they don't know what a podcast is, please show them so that they can take advantage of all our episodes. And if you have the ability to set up a monthly recurring donation of $5 or $10 or $20 on sspxpodcast.com, it would help us immensely to complete this Crisis in the Church project. Until next week, thank you for listening, and God bless you.